I recognize Ranking Member Huffman for the purpose of offering an amendment designated Dingle number 3. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to get it right this time. I am pinch hitting for Ms. Dingle on this particular amendment. So the bill legislatively would delist the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem DPS grizzly bear from the ESA and then block judicial review of the delisting. Now, we may hear, we have heard, that we need to block litigious groups or so-called radical environmentalists from suing on this delisting. And again, I'm amused at the adjectives that get thrown around in here. Judges rule against Donald Trump, and they are deemed activist judges. Environmental groups, I guess just for breathing the air, are automatically called radical environmentalists. I don't think I've ever heard a reference across the aisle to just environmental groups. There's something inherently radical about being an environmental group. But that's just an observation that I wanted to make as we make our way through this hearing. So, yeah, there's the narrative that we have to stop these radical environmentalists from suing on this delisting. But scientists, tribes, and industries also use the courts to hold the service accountable for doing their job on listing and delisting. It's not always radical environmentalists who are having access to justice and using judicial review. For example, when the Trump administration delisted the grizzly bear in 2017, tribes, scientists, and environmental groups sued. They argued that factors such as low genetic diversity, the growing human population in the area, warranted continued ESA protections for grizzly bears. And they also claimed that the Fish and Wildlife Service did not honor commitments to involve tribes in the delisting process of the grizzly bear. So access to courts for tribes and a whole bunch of other stakeholders actually helps ensure that the Fish and Wildlife Service does its job under the ESA and other laws like the Administrative Procedures Act, barring judicial review, is what's truly radical. Preventing access to the courts to question and challenge these decisions eliminates the checks and balances that the courts provide to ensure decisions are based on defensible science and are not arbitrary and capricious. This amendment simply brings back a little bit of common sense to this misguided attempt to delist the grizzly bear by an act of Congress. I urge my colleagues to vote yes and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Ms. Hageman, you're recognized.
This particular amendment would strike Section 2B, which prohibits judicial review of the rule. Mr. Chairman, I oppose this amendment. The point of this bill is to carry out the purpose and intent of the Endangered Species Act and ensure that the science controls listing and delisting decisions. The Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem grizzly bear has long surpassed its recovery goals, and all 5 standards under the Endangered Species Act have been met. Until the bear is returned to state control where it belongs, lawsuits and ever-shifting recovery standards will stand in the way. Activist judges have stood in the way of delisting for far too long. It is time to implement the ESA as intended and delist the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem grizzly population. Section 2B is essential to recognize this need and is also drafted in line with congressional precedent from delisting of wolves in Idaho and Montana. And it is important to note that despite the fact that delisting occurred well over a decade ago, and yet the gray wolves in Montana and Idaho are thriving, far exceeding recovery goals by an order of magnitude of 5 times what the recovery goals were. So it is objectively demonstrable that we can show when states take over management of these species, they are able to manage them and manage and protect a recovered population. This amendment is also a gift to the radical environmental lobby and yet another tactic and would only exacerbate the 97% failure rate of the Endangered Species Act. I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back.
The lady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? I recognize myself. Also oppose this amendment, as we know that grizzly bears in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, again, are recovered and should be delisted. States are ready and well equipped to manage grizzly bears above recovery goals while effectively mitigating conflicts between the species, humans, pets, and livestock. Again, We're in this situation because of judicial review, because 2 times previously, Fish and Wildlife has said the species should be delisted. And if you think this is unprecedented, just think about the precedent set by Congress when it delisted the northern Rocky Mountains population segment of gray wolves in 2011 by prohibiting judicial review. And notably, it was President Obama who created that precedent when he signed the legislation into law. While the opinion of judges may be of interest to political science, it's not the kind of science we want informed to make for decision makers under the Endangered Species Act. And, there are a lot of very good conservation organizations and environmental groups out there that are focused on doing the right thing, that are focused on creating better wildlife habitat. They're focused on recovering species and making sure that future generations are able to enjoy the species and the outdoor habitats that these species live in. And I applaud those organizations, but there are also organizations out there that seem more concerned about how much money they can raise, how many clicks they can get on their website, and how much they can control land use and other things that really, at the end of the day, are doing more damage to species than they are good to species. I would consider that radical, and I would consider that something that we shouldn't tolerate in Congress. Again, I urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Ranking Member Huffman, designated Dingle number 3. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
Recorded vote, please.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on the amendment will be postponed.